I'm Xiaoting Ho Jones from Doughnut Economics Action Lab. In this video, we'll explore why systems thinking is essential for governments seeking to foster economies that can meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. The 2008 financial crisis highlights the devastating consequences when economic policies are not effectively designed for complex systems. Many regulators believed financial networks always disperse risks, so they monitored individual banks but ignored their interconnections. They missed that these networks can switch from robust shock absorbers to fragile shock amplifiers. As Gordon Brown, the former UK Prime Minister, later admitted, "We didn't understand how risk was spread across the system. We didn't understand the entanglements of different institutions with each other." Though traditional economic thinking relies heavily on simplified linear models that assumes that cause and effect are straightforward and predictable. For example, the theory of market equilibrium assumes that markets function predictably, with a stable point where supply meets demand and can self-adjust to shocks. But markets are just one part of the economy, which is embedded in the society and dependent on our living planet. And together they form complex, interconnected, and unpredictable systems. To navigate the complexity of the modern economy, policymakers need to adopt a systems approach. There's a growing number of networks and resources created to support governments in such endeavor. We won't be able to cover all approaches here, but want to share some ideas to get you started in this video. First, policymakers need to consider how economic, social, and ecological systems interact and influence one another. Good policies work with these interconnections rather than against them. For example, policies that support landscape restoration led by local communities can create local jobs, strengthen social bonds, restore biodiversity, and improve soil health. These are the kinds of policies with multiple benefits that can reinforce each other. But some policies work in the opposite direction. For example, fossil fuel subsidies might reduce energy bills today, but can worsen climate change and harm public health over time. Short-term savings in one system, long-term costs across multiple systems. Navigating these complex connections isn't always straightforward, but policymakers can strive to design policies that create positive ripple effects across social, ecological, and economic dimensions. To consider and act on these interconnections, governments can work across sectoral and departmental silos to address complex interlinked societal challenges. The Doughnut, with all its social and ecological dimensions, provides a useful starting point for exploring these interconnections and fostering cross-sectoral collaborations. It helps ensure that policies are designed to meet human needs without overshooting planetary boundaries. Second, policymakers need to look beyond surface-level symptoms and understand the systemic structures that generate recurring problems. For instance, the rising prevalence of chronic diseases like diabetes is often treated as a healthcare issue requiring only medical interventions. However, a systems perspective reveals interconnected factors such as limited access to nature, widespread availability of ultra-processed foods, environmental pollution, and income inequality. These factors don't simply cause long-term illness independently. They interact in complex ways where, for example, low income limits access to health food options, which contributes to poor health outcomes, which can then further reduce economic opportunities, perpetuating the cycle. By understanding these systemic patterns, policymakers can design interventions that address the structural conditions generating the problem rather than just treating its symptoms. Third, governments can focus on higher leverage points. In complex systems, small changes in the right places can lead to transformative outcomes. Systems thinker Doughnut Economics showed us that in complex systems, where you intervene matters more than how hard you push. Policy interventions that only tweak low leverage points, like adjusting prices or fine-tuning regulations, are unlikely to be effective alone. Examples of higher leverage points include refining economic goals from GDP growth to well-being, transforming financial systems to be in service of life by redesigning the role and the operation of public financial institutions and changing financial regulations, and restoring feedback loops by shifting industrial systems from extractive to regenerative by design. Identifying and acting on these higher leverage points can amplify the impact of policy interventions. Fourth, adopt a learning and a collaborative approach. Rather than trying to predict and control the economic behavior, policymakers can embrace experimentation and adaptation. As complexity economist Eric Banhock argues, we can think of policy as an adapting portfolio of experiments that helps shape the evolution of the economy and society over time. This means testing policies, learning from results, and iterating continuously. It requires humility, recognizing that complex systems can't be fully predicted or controlled, but can be stewarded wisely through learning and collaboration within governments and with the public. System thinking is woven throughout Doughnut Economics. It requires governments to engage with higher leverage points like changing goals, understanding interconnections across social ecological dimensions and amongst different realms of the embedded economy, tackling underlying systemic structures that drive inequality and ecological breakdown by being regenerative and distributive by design, and redesign economic systems that aren't structurally dependent on endless growth. This transformation also requires governments to redesign their internal culture, rules, and processes. This will be further explored in part 2 of this guide called Deep Design of Government. You can explore real-world examples of how governments are thinking in systems and discover more insights on how to embed system thinking in governments through our web-based policymaker guide.